In this video, we're going to talk about recording expenses and purchases through the accounts payable workflow. Accounts payable eventually means that you record an expense on one day and you make the payment for that expense on an entirely different day. The transaction type that we use this in QuickBooks is called bills. We're going to go into the new button on the left-hand side, and then under vendors, we're going to find and select bills. When you click on bills, you see the new bill screen open up. And then the first thing you're going to do is select the vendor that sent you the bill. So we're going to click on the drop-down menu, and let's say this XYZ vendor is the ones that send us the bill. Sometimes vendor bills will say the word invoice in it because from the vendor's perspective, they're invoicing you. And then you're taking their invoice and you're entering it as a bill in QuickBooks. In QuickBooks, when you enter invoices, that's actually the accounts receivable workflow, and that's for you to send to your customers. So in QuickBooks, accounts payable is bills. If the vendor sends you a bill that has the word invoice on it, you need to know that's a bill, not an invoice in QuickBooks. Anyway, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to find the bill date on that document and you're going to match it in QuickBooks. And then if there's a due date for that bill, you can click on the drop-down menu and select the specific due date. If your vendor has specific terms that they give you, 15 days, 30 days, 60 days, and you have it here on your drop-down menu, which you can also create your own terms if you want to. If the ones that come by default are not enough, you can select that and the due date will change automatically. Now you do want to put the invoice number from the bill you got from your customer. You want to put it in there so you can recognize it, especially if you're going to be recording multiple bills for the same vendor. You need to know which bill you're paying. Then under category, this is where we're going to put the expense category or the account from your chart of accounts that best represents what that bill means. So let's say they're charging you for some sort of contracting services. So let's go and see if we have contractor or contract labor. Okay, this is perfect. So let's say we're subcontracting this company and to use their employees for some labor for our business. Then under description, we can put labor for Miami job or something like that. Okay, so whatever description information that best fits, that'll help you remember what you're paying for. That would be very useful. Under amount, we're going to copy the amount over from the vendor's invoice, and we're going to put that in there. If you want to split the expense into multiple categories, so let's say, for example, the $2,500 is really $2,000 in labor and $500 in materials, then we will break this up and put 2,000 in one line, and then let's look for a materials category or something like that. There we go, supplies and materials, and we're going to put $500 on that. And then we can put here materials for Miami job. Okay. Again, it becomes self-explanatory because the name of the account is labor and the name of the account is materials. But again, it's up to you what kind of memo you would like to start using. Okay. So now we have a total bill for $2,500. At this point, we can either just save it. We can click on the drop-down menu and do save and close, save and new. And there's also save and schedule payment, which is whenever you have turned on the bill pay feature inside QuickBooks Online, which is a different module altogether that you would have to turn on and add on if you want QuickBooks to make physical payments either via check or electronically via ACH to your vendors. In this specific case, we're assuming that you're going to be making your own payment arrangements. You're not going to be using scheduled payments through the bill pay feature. So we're going to click on save and just save the bill or save and close and X out of that. Let's do one more example. I'm going to click on the new button on the left-hand side, going to bill. And let's say this time around, I got a bill from Verizon Wireless. So I'm going to click on the drop-down menu, click on add new because Verizon is not in my list, and create the vendor on the fly. So you can always create vendors on the fly. And again, you can add addresses, phone numbers, notes, whatever you want related to that vendor if you want to, or you can just create the vendor by the vendor name and that's it. Then we're gonna copy the information that we have in the bill in terms of bill date and bill number, all that stuff. So let's say we received this bill on 1/20/2024 and the due date is the 26th and the bill number, we'll just copy the bill number from there. Then under category, we're going to put here a phone or communications or telephone, depending on what your chart of account looks like. You're going to have to figure out which is the chart of account that best fits that. And let's say the amount from the bill is $596 with 12 cents. Okay, and that's really all you need to do. One thing to add here is if you have an actual physical bill in PDF or in an image format, you can actually click on attachments, find the specific image that you have, attach it, and then that becomes part of the documentation. You can attach any documents that you want into the bills for your record. So then I'm going to go ahead and click on the drop-down menu, click Save and Close, and we're going to be finished with that. So let's talk about making a payment to this bill. So there's a couple of ways to make payments to the bills. One, we can just simply click on the new button on the left-hand side and then click right there under bill where it says pay bill. That would be kind of sort of step number one. We click on pay bill. Then we're going to get a list of all of our open bills right there on the screen. Then we get to choose which bank account we're paying from. Again, this is if you're paying these bills separately from QuickBooks. You're writing them a check or you're paying them electronically or paying them with a credit card. Then you're going to record the bill payment in QuickBooks. We're not actually initiating the payment from QuickBooks right now. We're just mimicking what happened in the real world. So I'm going to select the bank account that we're paying from. Let's assume we're paying with a check. And then we'll put here the date that we wrote them the check. We'll put the check number. This is the physical check number that we're writing them. Then I select the specific vendor that I'm paying with that check. If I'm partially paying the vendor, that's possible too. I can just select a specific partial payment. So let's say I'm only going to pay this vendor $2,200. So basically I'm short paying them $300. The bill will still have $300 open from it because I'm only paying part of it. Then I'm going to click on save, or I can click save and close or save and print. So if you're going to print the check straight from here, you can. If you have printable checks, you can follow the setup process and the printable check workflow. Let's do a slightly different workflow for paying bills. Let's say that we're going to look at the bill first. So let me go into the new button, then click on bill. And then I can click on the history button here where I can see all the historical bills. I'm looking at the bill specifically, and I want to initiate the bill payment from the screen, which you can do that as well, simply by clicking on this little button on the top right that says Mark as Paid. And when you click on Mark as Paid, it takes you to a bill payment screen that's slightly different than the other bill payment screen. But this is a bill payment screen that starts by selecting the vendor for you and automatically marking the specific bill that you want to pay. So it kind of does that step for you and it saves you that step. So the earlier screen that we picked is when we're gonna choose which bills we're gonna pay and possibly pay a bunch of bills, and we can do a whole bunch of bill payments in batch if we want to and print a bunch of checks in batch. This specific workflow is slightly different because we're actually opening the bill first, and then from that bill, we're making that payment. So let's go ahead and click on Save and Close, and that finishes that workflow. Okay, let's go into the Expenses tab on the left-hand side and click on Bills. Okay, this bill section will actually show me all the bills I have in my system. If I have any bills ready for review, any unpaid bills, any historically paid bills, they're going to show up in here. If I look at unpaid bills, we're actually going to see the XYZ vendor that we partially paid. As you can see here, the original bill amount is $2,500, but it has an open balance of $300. So if I want to pay that bill later on, I can do it from here. Or also, let's say, for example, the vendor calls us and says, you know what? You don't have to pay me the rest. We made a mistake. We're going to give you an adjustment to that bill. Now, a lot of people instinctually will go open the bill and make a physical change to the bill. We'll actually open the bill and change it and reduce the numbers to make it go down $300. However, that's not the optimal way to do it. The ultimate way to do it, especially if you have multiple bills and multiple situations where they will be giving you credit to pay those bills or to reduce the accounts payable or the balance of those bills, is to do what's called a bill credit. So we're going to click on the new button, and then we're going to see under bill, pay bills, we're going to go down under purchase orders. There's a specific option called vendor credit. When we click on vendor credit, you get a screen that looks identical as a bill, but essentially what we do is we select the vendor's name, then we pick the category, so sort of which line items are they adjusting. So we pick the line item that made the most sense. So let's say they're going to adjust our contract labor, and we're going to put 300. We can put a note like vendor adjusting for errors or something like that. And then notice that I'm not putting a negative number. I'm just putting a regular positive number. If they issue us like a formal document for a vendor credit and there's a reference number we want to put in there, we would put that reference number in there so we know what that's for. And then we click on Save and Close. So now if we were to go back into expenses bills and we look at our open bills, this bill still shows open for $300 because we have not yet applied that payment to it. So to apply the payment to it, and it's a bit counterintuitive, is we're going to click on Mark as Paid because we're not actually paying the bill, we're applying a bill credit. But we're going to click Mark as Paid, and immediately you're actually going to see your bill and your vendor credit right under that. So as long as you see a bill and a vendor credit with a check mark right next to it, and you see actual no money being exchanged under this amount all the way in the top, that's zero, that's basically indicating that this screen, the bill payment, you're actually not making a payment. You're taking a previously set up bill credit and you're using it to pay that bill off. And you can, if that credit is applying to multiple bills, you can manually adjust which bill it gets applied to right from this screen. So that's how you essentially apply the bill credit. Save and close, and you'll be done. Now, let me show you a slightly different workflow. Let's make the assumption that we have this old bill sitting in our QuickBooks from many years ago, and we're no longer going to pay it, and we don't want it in our system anymore. Well, first of all, you need to find the bill, take a look at it, and make sure you have a keen understanding to what kind of account was used originally on this bill. So let's say we have this old bill from 2019, and it was for advertising and marketing radio ads, and it was for $6,900. So now what I need to do is I need to write this off. Instinctively, you may think, Hector, I'll just delete the bill of QuickBooks and I'll be done. Not a good idea because you're going to be changing your financial statements from back in 2019. So then the proper way to adjust an old bill, one, you can use a bill credit. That's possible. We could enter a bill credit for this year and apply it, and you just saw that workflow. But I'm going to show you one more thing, which is doing it through a journal entry. Not necessarily the best way to do it. It's more of an advanced type of concept, but I want to show you regardless because it is one way you can affect accounts payable. So I'm going to go to the new button, and then under other, I'm going to go down to journal entry. In the journal entry, the first thing I'm going to do is the journal date. I'm going to put today's date. So let's say we're in February 2024. And today is when we're recognizing that we will no longer ever going to pay that bill. So the first account we're going to put is accounts payable, because that's the account that runs all your bill balances. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reduce that accounts payable through a debit by putting $6,900. So accounts payable gets reduced through debits, increased through credits. Again, this is more of an advanced concept. Most of the time, only really accountants deal with this. So we're going to put here writing off old bill or whatever we want to put in there. Then under name, we're going to put here our vendor's name. So this one's called old vendor. And then the second entry here, the balancing entry, is going to be that advertising and marketing sub-account radio ads that we had on the original bill. So as long as we have that debit and that credit balancing each other, and essentially what we're doing is we're killing that accounts payable, we're getting rid of that accounts payable, reducing that balance, and in exchange, we're also reducing our expenses for this year for the same dollar amount. Okay, so that once we're done, we click Save and Close, and we successfully reduce that accounts payable. If we actually go into the Expenses tab and go into Vendors, and specifically find our old vendor, we're going to see that our old vendor has an open balance of zero. Like we actually do not owe that vendor any money. It's right there. It's very clear that we've written that off. However, it still shows a $6,900 overdue balance because the bill itself still shows as an open bill because we have not applied that credit to that bill. So the same way that we would apply a credit memo or a vendor credit, we would apply a journal entry just as well. So what we need to do in this case is to go to new pay bills. And again, counterintuitive because we're actually not going to pay the bill. What we're going to do is we're going to apply that bill payment. So under filters, I'm just going to put here custom, and I'm going to go back to all the way down to before 2019. So that bill shows. And notice that that bill is showing right here. If I select that bill, QuickBooks automatically is going to say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and apply the credit. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't show the specific credit that's being applied. That's sort of the tricky part of going through this workflow to do that. And this is one of the ways you can do it. Unfortunately, if you have multiple credits and you want to pick which of the credits you want to apply, QuickBooks actually just behind the scenes uses the oldest one to apply it to here. If you happen to have multiple potential credits that you're going to apply and you want to pick and choose specifically which one, then you want to use a slightly different workflow. So we're going to X out of that and show you that one as well. That way you know you kind of have all your bases covered. But in order to do that, I'm actually going to go down into this journal entry and I'm actually going to split this into two. So I'm going to make this one 900 instead of 6,000. So we're just essentially going to do two separate credits so you can see them clearly when we go to apply them. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this transaction. I'm going to click on copy. And then I'll do this one for 6,000 and then 6,000. And I'll just backdate this one to 2022. Let's see, we're actually going to see two credits pending for this particular vendor. So I'm going to hit save and close. And essentially, when I actually go back and look at that specific bill that's still open, so I'm going to go back and look at that $6,900 bill that's still open, still showing overdue, still showing open. If I click on mark as paid, so instead of going through the Payable workflow, I'm actually going to select the specific bill, click on mark as paid. You will notice that in this bill payment screen, again, it's a net of zero, no money being exchanged, which is perfect, is what we want. We actually get to see the multiple journal entries, and this will work the same way with multiple bill credits, multiple journal entries that we could use, and we can actually say, you know what, I only want to apply this $900 to that bill and then do no money exchange, put zero here, and just make sure that's only 900. And then at that point, that bill for 6,900 would now only show $6,000 open. And then maybe I intend to pay a part of that later in the future. That's possible too. Essentially, I'm just trying to show you that you can pick and choose which of the historical vendor credits, specifically how much of the vendor credits you can use on each. So I'm actually literally just choosing how much from each one I want to pick. Let's just put 6,900 up here. And then I get to pick how much from each of the vendor credits or the journal entries we can use to apply to the bill. So we're basically managing our old accounts payable, making adjustments to them via a journal entry or via a bill credit. So then we click save and close. And now if I go back into that vendor screen and I go into my old vendor, now it should show that I have nothing overdue, everything is paid off. And you get to see the entire history of the actual bill for 6,900, the journal entry for 6,000, the other journal entry for 900, and then the bill payment that I can click on, and I can see exactly the history of how those two credits were actually applied to that open bill. There's one more part of the bill payment or accounts payable workflow worth looking at, which is what happens if you have an open bill and that open bill gets matched through the bank feed, through the downloaded transactions through the bank. So let's go into transactions. We're going to click on bank transactions. And then we're going to see, I'm actually going to click on spend. So we get to see the transactions that were spent kind of in order. And then we're going to go down and find one of these transactions for $596.12. If you remember, we actually had created a bill for that exact same dollar amount earlier. So if I want to make sure that those transactions match, instead of clicking on add and creating a new transaction in the bank feed, I'm going to click on where it says find match. I'm going to click on find match, and then I'm going to go find the bill from all my open bills. In this case, I happen to just have one, and match it through there. That way, I am not going to duplicate that entry by downloading the transactions from the bank and creating it as a new entry. I'm actually going to make sure that if I'm creating bills and accounts payable prior to downloading transactions from the bank, that I match every single one of those transactions that already attached, that need to be attached to a bill. If I'm downloading transactions that don't have any bills associated with them, then I'm going to be creating those transactions in the bank feed and they come in as expenses. But if I'm using an accounts payable workflow, such as creating a bill prior, I definitely want to go through the process of matching them in bank feed instead of creating new transactions. For example, you see that there's another transaction here from Verizon Wireless for $444.74. Let's say we don't have a bill for $444.74, then I would be creating it from here, and I would be putting here phone expense or whatever it is, and I would be creating the transaction from here because there's no bill outstanding for that same dollar amount. Now, if you want to know, let's say, for example, at that point, you're saying, Hector, but how do I know what bills are outstanding and which ones are not? Well, you can run a report that shows you all the bills you have open. So you can go to bill and then go to it's bills, unpaid. So unpaid bills. So you select unpaid bills, and then you have a list of all the bills that are unpaid. So right now in this particular QuickBooks file, I don't have any unpaid bills, but I'll create one really quick on the fly so you can see what it looks like when that gets created in the system. So let me create a bill for $1,500, click on Save and Close, and now all of a sudden we go back and refresh the report, and then it shows up in our list of unpaid bills. So you should always run your list of unpaid bills, decide which bills you're going to pay, and then if you're going to go through your bank feed, just make sure that there isn't a bill that you're expecting to show up on the bank feed as a payment, as a recent payment, so you can match it instead of creating a new transaction. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is using items in your bills instead of using accounts, using items in your bills, and also purchase orders for your bills. Now, in order to do that, I actually have to upgrade my QuickBooks. I'm actually using QuickBooks Online Simple Start for this specific example. I'm going to have to upgrade my plan to Plus Edition because the Plus Edition of QuickBooks Online is the one that has the ability for you to put items in bills, also do purchase orders, and as an added bonus, you can also run and manage inventory, which we're not going to cover through here. But if you have inventory, accounts payable is a very common thing because most vendors sell your inventory on account. They'll ship you the inventory and you pay them later, sort of thing. So I wanted to enable QuickBooks Plus so I can show you both of those workflows. So let's start by going into the new button and then going into bill. And then you're going to notice that bills, the only option you have here is to choose categories. There isn't an option enabled to add items into bills, but you can do that simply by adding it in the settings. So I'm going to X out of that, and I'm going to go into the gear menu on the top right of the screen, and then I'm going to go into account and settings, and then under expenses, there should be under the option of bills and expenses. I can click on that, and one of the options you're going to see in here, it says show items table on expense and purchase order forms. So if I click on that, now all of a sudden when I create a bill, I'm going to see an item instead of an account. And the other thing I want to add here is track expenses items by customer. That's going to be crucial if the expenses that you're entering, the bills, the accounts payable, has to do with that existing customer or project. And maybe you even want to make these expenses potentially billable to the customer as well. So if you want to add that, you have to make sure that you have to come into the settings and turn all those things on. So we went ahead and turned that on. Then I'm going to click on done. Then I'm going to go into new and create a new bill. And now we're going to see a couple of things slightly different. Well, number one, in the category section, now it's actually labeled category details. Before it wasn't. And now we also see a customer column where you can take an expense and mark it billable to the customer. If I actually scroll down and click on the little triangle under item details, and I collapse category details, then instead of entering my expenses into categories, I'm going to enter them into items. So for example, I'm going to select my vendor name here. So let's say this is going to be XYZ vendor. And then under product and service, I click on the drop-down menu and I can select the specific item from my item list. Now, one little caveat is when you create items, products and services, you actually have to tell QuickBooks that this particular product and service is eligible to be used in a purchase transaction. So for example, I'm going to click on add new and I'm going to create a new non-inventory product. And then I'm going to call it a USB cable. So let's say we sell USB cables. We don't track the inventory, but we have it in here. Notice that there's a checkbox that says, I sell this product or service. If that checkbox is on, that means I can use that item in an invoice, in a sales receipt. And then if this checkbox that says, I purchased these is not checked on, if I don't have that on, then I will not be able to use it in a bill. So QuickBooks understands that you're creating the item from the bill screen. So it's making the assumption that you do want to use this item for a purchase sort of scenario. So let's put here under the materials expense or something like that. So because you're going to use this item in a purchase scenario, you have to have that checkbox. So if you ever create an item and you click on this drop-down menu and you look at it and you say, hey, my item is not showing up in here. Why is it not showing up in there? It's probably because we didn't have that little checkbox that says we're using this item in a purchase transaction. So let's say this is going to be $75. So we're paying from XYZ vendor. We're going to put today's date. We're buying a USB cable. And again, we did non-inventory because we're not going to discuss inventory in this particular video. Check out the description for all my entire playlist of QuickBooks Online videos. I have an entire different video that goes really deep into the entire inventory workflow, which includes some of the accounts payable, but mostly the inventory portion. We're focused on accounts payable for the moment. And then if this particular set of wires was for a specific customer, I can track it through that customer column, or I can even mark it billable if I want to be reminded to invoice my customer for it. So that's really optional whether you're going to mark it billable or not. So essentially what we did is we enabled the ability to use both items and categories on bills, so you can always do that. Now, if we're going to do a purchase order, which is basically a transaction that we do prior to the bill, it's actually a non-posting transaction. You don't have to create a purchase order in order to do a bill, but the purchase order is nice because it reminds you that you order some stuff, or maybe you order some services from a particular vendor, and eventually you're going to be creating a bill with those items. So we're going to go into the new button and go to purchase order. Notice purchase orders is showing there because we turned on QuickBooks Online Plus, and the purchase order looks pretty much identical to a bill. The difference is that it says it right there really big that it is a purchase order. And let's say for this old vendor, I want to do a purchase order for a couple of items. So we're going to pick this and this, and then we'll put a dollar amounts associated with my purchase. And when I finish creating the purchase order, nothing's going to affect my system. This is not accounts payable. I don't owe that money. I don't have an open balance. It's not going to show up in my banks. It's not going to show up in any of my reports because a purchase order is just a pro forma transaction. But what's nice is later on, when I want to receive that purchase order, or when the vendor actually sends me a bill for that purchase order, I can go to the new button and then click on bill. And then when I click on the drop-down menu and select all vendor, here on the right-hand side, there will be a drawer reminding me I already have a purchase order for this vendor. And it's most probable a future bill that you're going to be creating is going to come from a purchase order. So all I have to do is click on add, and I will be adding the components to that vendor. Now you do have to be careful because sometimes QuickBooks will automatically add a line based on what the last transaction was. So like this 1500 was added from a previous transaction. So I'm going to delete that. QuickBooks tries to help you by speeding up the process, but you just have to be very, very careful that if QuickBooks is adding things for you, is that what you want? Is that what you meant to do? So that's so this is essentially how we close the circle on an open purchase order all the way through the process of creating the bill. Then we click on save or save and close, and then you pay the bill in whichever way, shape, or form you need to pay it, or match it with a downloaded bank transaction if that's going to be your workflow. The nice thing is when you look at a bill that's been linked to a purchase order, we can click up here where it says link to purchase order. Click on that, and then you can click on the purchase order, and you can view the purchase order as a separate transaction than the invoice. The purchase order could have one date. The bill could have a different date. The purchase order could have an intent that you want to buy 100 units, and then maybe in the bill you only really bought 60 units, not 100, because maybe they shipped you short, or you changed your mind from the moment that you did a purchase order that the vendor actually executed the order, sent you the items, or sold you the services. So that particular piece is more advanced. I know not a lot of people are going to be using items in bills or using the purchase order workflow, but if you're going to be using inventory, it's very, very likely that you're going to be using the purchase order workflow. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, go in the description, check out all the other videos I have in this series for QuickBooks Online. If you like this video, make sure you hit a thumbs up. Make sure you add comments to ask what kind of content you'd like to see in the future, and subscribe to the channel so you can be notified next time I create another video like this. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.